Good evening, everybody. My name's Neil Turton. I'm a pastor at Long Crendon Baptist Church. It's my pleasure this week to be interviewing different members of our church across the kitchen table about their different experiences of life, in many situations where they may have been tempted to ask the question, where is God in all of this? Well, my guest this evening is somebody who's originally from Minnesota, who married a Yorkshireman. She's a mother also to three children, to Madeline, Elijah and Josiah. She was a music teacher, now studying creative writing. Sadly, her youngest son, Josiah, died 5 years ago of cancer. And so, Kathy, it's great you're able to talk about this evening. So thanks for being willing to be interviewed. If we can go back to that moment when you got that diagnosis, which every parent must dread. Can you remember how you felt at that moment?
Yeah, I think it was such a shock. It felt a bit like getting kicked in the gut. I think I felt pretty sick. But there was also, because Josiah was there with me, it was he and I in the room, I felt this strange peace that I think was because I was so concerned not to make Josiah more worried than he might be.
What was the treatment that he had to receive?
Yeah, once we had the cancer treatment, he had about a couple of weeks of tests and scans and operations and stuff. But overall, he had about a year of chemo, 7 major surgeries. He had some extra treatment that was supposed to help keep the cancer from coming back, and then he also had a bit of time in the pain clinic at the Nuffield. And on top of all that, he had regular physio. His operation included, his big operation included taking a big chunk of his leg out and having an implant. So learning how to walk again, things like that, was part of his physio.
At some stage, it looked like the treatment might be successful, but then sadly the cancer came back again. What happened after that? Yeah,
it was really quite a shock to us, because when he was kind of finished his treatment, everything looked pretty clear. They told us that they couldn't guarantee there weren't any small cells floating around with cancer, but it looked like everything was fine. So when we went back for his 2-month checkup, his first review, we had expected everything to go fine, but the scans showed that tumors were throughout his lungs in a way that he couldn't be operated on. Yeah, that was pretty horrible to find out. And we were offered a couple of kinds of chemo. We were offered possible experimental treatment if there was anything available, but that would only be if we had tried the chemo before, or we could just go ahead with no treatment. If he had any of these extra treatments, he probably, they said, at most could have expected maybe a couple more years of life. But he would have spent almost the entire time in the hospital feeling sick. At the time we got that diagnosis, he was actually feeling really good and able to do a lot of things. He had started some schooling again. And so he made the decision not to have further treatment. We decided to support him in that. It really wasn't a question. I think he felt a little bit more concerned about how we would feel, whether we wanted him to try having some more treatment. But yeah, we were all very unified pretty quickly. It was a little bit strange because the doctor kept coming back and asking us, well, we'll sit with that decision for a week. And then we'd come back to it again in another week. And they kept asking us 3 or 4 times, I think. And I only was told later that it was because the decision not to have further treatment was so unusual for parents and children with cancer. Most parents, obviously, as people would understand, will do pretty much whatever they could to get additional time with their children. And we just felt that we needed to support Josiah in his decision.
You are a Christian, you have a Christian faith. How did you see God helping you through this whole journey?
Yeah, I think it was during the time of his treatment. there was a ton of practical support that we had from people from the church and other friends, bringing meals, helping support the other kids, that kind of stuff, visits, bringing donuts to Josiah when he was in the hospital because he didn't like to eat much, things like that. That was just that kind of love was great. It felt like a reflection of God's love. There was also some really specific small detail prayers that were answered, like we never could not find a parking place. And many people will know what it's like to try to find a parking place in a hospital car park when they're so overloaded. But, things like that just felt like we were being provided for along the way. And then we also were told from people that we didn't know, as well as people we did know, were praying for us around the world, Australia, America, throughout Europe, Africa, South America. We had people praying for us just about everywhere. And it was very encouraging. And that really helped during that time. It was also really helpful to see, I think one of the ways that I could cope was seeing how well Josiah was coping, because he seemed to, as many kids do, kind of just be carried through it.
Yeah, I mean, he did seem to maintain his sort of cheery disposition, didn't he? We've actually got a picture of him here, which I'll share on the screen. What seemed to help Josiah to cope, would you say?
Yeah, when we talked about this before, I think there were three real things that came to mind immediately. One was humor. You can see his smile there. He had a great sense of humor. Wasn't always happy, obviously. If he was throwing up all the time with chemo, he wasn't laughing and making jokes, but he had a really good sense of humor, and he would bring things out, like a specific one was one where the chemo he was on could affect his hearing. So every time the doctor came to see him, he would ask, "And how's your hearing?" And every time Josiah would just sort of look blankly at him and say, "Pardon?" Which got the doctor or the nurse or whoever was asking every single time. And then we just laughed. And he told me once that making jokes helped the dark not feel so dark. So that was a big thing. Another thing that helped us cope was reading. We read a lot for distraction and pretty much whatever he wanted me to read. And a lot of that actually was the Bible. He chose things like he loved the book of Acts. He loved the stories in Kings and Chronicles, especially we'd read the story about King Josiah that he was named after. He really enjoyed Bible reading, especially the narrative stories. And then prayer was really huge for him. We prayed for everything. Anytime he had any kind of treatment, he asked us to pray for it, sometimes 3 or 4 times before the thing would actually happen. And so I could see that he had a really solid confidence that Jesus was taking care of him. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
How have you and your husband Mark coped since your son's death?
Sorry, I'm totally losing the plot.
Yeah, take a moment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has helped us was knowing that Josiah was fine, that he was okay. We knew it was really clear that Josiah wasn't afraid to die. And I could see that just in his demeanor when we were talking about it. You know, he went to every single appointment that we ever had. Never wanted to be left out or go to watch a video while we talked to the doctors or anything like that. And he was really clear up front that his time was limited. But he just kind of got on with life and made the most of what he could do and the kinds of things he could enjoy. Sadly, after he was diagnosed with a cancer returning, his back broke and he ended up paralyzed from the waist down. But even then, he could enjoy computer games with his brother and things. And just the way he kept looking forward was great. He also continued to think about others a lot. He gave gifts of, he asked us to give his money to charity. He gave his laptop to his brother and some other kinds of things that clearly he was looking outward. And when we did talk about dying, he just calmly would ask questions like, "What's it like to die?" Or the day before he was going to die, he asked me, "Am I going to die today?" Just as if, you know, is it time to go to school today or whatever? You know, it's just so calm. And that really has helped us to look back and be able to say, Josiah was not afraid. I think the other thing that's been hugely helpful to us is just the support of the church, Christian friends praying for us, spending time with us. We had some time and still occasionally have time with the Helen and Douglas House bereavement team, which has been really supportive. We do it a day at a time. Some days are sort of fine and some days are really horrible, and we cry when we need to cry, and we recognize that it's okay to feel horrible sometimes, and that this isn't something that goes away, that you get over. A good friend from church who also had a child die, her son died some years before, told me a phrase that has really stuck with me, and that is, you don't get over it, you learn to accommodate. And that hole will always be there, and we recognize that, but we just get on with it, I guess. And we also really feel it is important to keep grounded in biblical truth, because it's easy to kind of get stuck in our own feelings sometimes and feel like, where is God in all this? And yet the Bible tells us he is there. He's walking with us. He's carrying us through, and keeping focused on biblical truth is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting what you say there at the end, because I guess some people will be thinking, well, how can you believe in God when he's, when your son suffered and died in this way? How do you respond to somebody who asks that question?
Yeah, and I totally understand that. Some of our close friends that we've made through the hospital and through the hospice have struggled, maybe left their faith or never could come to one. They feel like they can't come to one. But for me, it feels like for one, my faith is a gift from God. It's not something that I've done that I'm particularly brave or smart or something like that. Or stupid, maybe. It's not an issue of how I am. It's what God has given me to believe. But also, I recognize that if I take God out of the picture, it doesn't make the pain go away. It doesn't help the situation, really. It doesn't resolve the problem of suffering to say God isn't there, because there still is suffering, and my grief is still very real. Instead, what I find is that the truth that I will see Josiah again in heaven, because I know Josiah trusted Jesus, I'm trusting Jesus, I know we will be reunited. God tells us in the Bible that in heaven there will be no more suffering, no more grief, no more pain. And that's something I can look forward to and hold on to. That's how I cope, really, from day to day.
And are there any sort of final comments you'd like to say by way of advice to anybody listening or watching who has maybe experienced what you've experienced, the loss of a child, or maybe trying to support somebody else who they know who's gone through that? Any last words you'd like to share with them? Yeah,
I think one thing that's really important to recognize for all of us, whether you are grieving or not, is that this is a lot more common than we might think, especially when you consider miscarriage. There are lots and lots of parents out there who know what it's like to miss their child, to grieve what might have been, and so you're not alone. There's a lot more of us out there than we would like to think. I think too, even though we can feel we're really alone, we're not, and it's good to talk to people who are happy to listen. Remember that not everybody's going to say the helpful thing. Some people will say things that are very hard. For those of you who are supporting somebody in grief, just remember that bringing up our children's names, talking about the people that we miss, doesn't make it hurt more, because it hurts already. So it's okay to talk about it. And we really do like talking about our kids. We miss them dreadfully every day. And I think too, just if you are a Christian or you're thinking about that and you think, but I don't know how to pray, sometimes just the prayer, "Help, Lord," is all that it needs. You don't need to have some flowery language. God knows what your needs are, and he will be there for you. He's been there for me.
Well, thanks very much, Kathy, for being willing to be interviewed this evening. And can I just say, if anybody is watching and would like to talk to you further or talk to somebody here in the church, please contact us. Details will appear on the video at the end through the Long Baptist Church website. Thanks very much, Kathy, and thank you to all those who've been watching. Good night, God bless.
Good night.